At an altitude of 26,000 feet, the atmosphere is profoundly hostile to human biology. The air is exceptionally thin, oxygen saturation is dangerously low, and the ambient temperature hovers well below freezing. On the afternoon of the 2nd of June 1995, an American F-16C Block 40 fighter jet was traveling at approximately 400 knots through the dense overcast above the fractured, mountainous terrain of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The aircraft, designated with the operational call sign Basha 52, was piloted by United States Air Force Captain Scott O'Grady. He was operating as part of Operation Deny Flight, a complex North Atlantic Treaty Organization mission specifically designed to enforce a strict United Nations no-fly zone. To the uninitiated observer, the airspace might have seemed quiet, but modern aerial warfare is dictated not by visual confirmation, but by the invisible, highly contested geometry of the electromagnetic spectrum. Down below, heavily concealed within the rugged topography near the town of Mrkonjić Grad, a Bosnian Serb mobile surface-to-air missile battery had gone active. The system on the ground was the 2K-12 Cub, classified by NATO intelligence under the reporting name SA-6 Gainful. It is a highly lethal, tracked, radar-guided platform capable of projecting an interceptor missile into the upper atmosphere at speeds exceeding Mach 2.8. The operators of this specific battery were highly trained and acutely aware of NATO's electronic warfare capabilities. They understood that utilizing their target acquisition radar continuously would immediately broadcast their exact coordinates to NATO aircraft equipped with high-speed anti-radiation missiles. Therefore, they employed a deadly, mathematically precise tactic known as a pop-up engagement. They relied on rudimentary low-frequency early warning systems to track the general flight path of the American fighters. They waited with absolute patience until the F-16S were directly overhead, entering the kinematic no-escape zone of the missile before they activated their high-frequency targeting radar. By doing this, they reduced the warning time for the pilots from minutes to a matter of mere seconds. If you want to understand the exact mechanics of modern military survival and the precise execution of recovery operations, make sure to hit subscribe and stay focused. The technical details matter, and we analyze history without the Hollywood myths. In the cockpit of Basha 52, the electronic threat warning systems shrieked to life with terrifying suddenness. O'Grady's instruments registered the hard, undisputed lock of the SA-6 continuous wave targeting radar. Because of the dense, opaque cloud cover below him, visual identification of the incoming threat was entirely impossible. The first missile tore through the airspace, detonating precisely between O'Grady's F-16 and the aircraft of his flight lead. The shockwave rattled the airframes, but before evasive maneuvers could be fully executed to break the radar lock, the second missile found its mark. The proximity fuse of the SA-6 warhead, designed to detonate just before physical impact to maximize fragmentation damage, exploded just beneath the belly of O'Grady's F-16. The physics of the impact were catastrophic and instantaneous. The massive detonation of the 50-kilogram high-explosive fragmentation warhead severed the structural integrity of the aircraft's fuselage. It effectively snapped the highly advanced fighter jet in two, the cockpit instantly filled with blinding smoke and the searing heat of aviation fuel igniting. At a speed of nearly 400 miles per hour, plunging rapidly toward hostile territory, O'Grady reached down and initiated the ACES-2 ejection sequence. The ACES-2 ejection seat is a marvel of aeronautical engineering designed to violently expel a human being from a disintegrating aircraft while attempting to preserve their physiological structure. When O'Grady pulled the ejection handle, explosive bolts fired, blowing the canopy clear of the airframe. Milliseconds later, rocket motors ignited, firing the seat and the pilot upward with an acceleration of 12 to 14 Gs. The sudden exposure to the slipstream at 400 miles per hour was brutal. The sheer kinetic force of the wind blast ripped O'Grady's oxygen mask from his face, inflicting severe friction burns across his neck and exposed skin. The deceleration forces subjected his body to extreme strain, a violent transition from the pressurized environment of the cockpit to the chaotic, freezing freefall of a high-altitude combat ejection. We are breaking down the precise timeline and the physiological reality of this operation step by step. Subscribe to the channel if you value verified, tactical history, and the absolute truth of military endurance. As the seat fell away, his main parachute deployed automatically, the ballistic opening shock jarring his spine. Suspended in the air, drifting slowly toward the ground through the cloud layer, O'Grady was now a highly visible target. Below him, the terrain was heavily populated by Bosnian Serb paramilitary forces, and they had visually confirmed the fireball of the destroyed F-16. They were already tracking his descent, mobilizing ground units and heavily armed patrols to calculate his landing vector. He steered his parachute toward a densely wooded area, seeking any available geographical concealment. The moment his boots hit the damp soil, the theoretical training of the United States military was immediately tested against the absolute reality of ground combat evasion. He immediately executed the standard operating procedures of the Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape program, universally known as SEER. The priority was absolute concealment. He quickly disconnected himself from the parachute canopy, recognizing that the massive expanse of fabric would act as a beacon. He secured his standard-issue survival vest and his 29-pound survival rucksack. This bag contained the bare minimum required to sustain a human life in a non-permissive environment: a basic medical kit, a lensatic compass, camouflage face paint, survival flares, an MS-2000 infrared strobe, a survival knife, a small supply of water in vacuum-sealed packets, and the PRC-112 survival radio. With his gear secured, he did not run blindly into the forest. Blind movement creates auditory anomalies and leaves a highly trackable thermal and physical footprint. Instead, he moved deliberately, calculating every step to minimize ground disturbance. He found a shallow depression beneath a thick canopy of heavy brush and literally vanished into the topography. To comprehend the sheer discipline required for this level of tactical evasion, drop a like and pay close attention to what happens next. The margin between life and death in this environment is measured in inches, decibels, and degrees of body temperature. Within minutes, the perimeter was physically breached by heavily armed Bosnian Serb search parties. They had pinpointed the general location of the parachute drop and were systematically sweeping the woods with infantry tactics. O'Grady opened his survival kit and applied dark camouflage paint to his face and hands, utilizing mud from the ground to further eliminate the natural, highly visible shine of human skin. He lay face down in the dirt, pressing his body as flat as biomechanically possible against the earth. He concealed his hands under his chest and closed his eyes, knowing that the moisture of human retinas can reflect ambient light. The enemy patrols moved aggressively through the brush, their heavy boots cracking twigs mere feet from his position. They were close enough that O'Grady could smell the pungent tobacco smoke from their cigarettes and hear the sharp, metallic clatter of their rifle bolts being cycled. In a desperate attempt to flush him out of the thicket or force a reaction, the paramilitaries began firing their automatic weapons randomly into the bushes. Supersonic 7.62mm bullets snapped through the branches, stripping bark from trees and impacting the dirt all around him. The psychological endurance required in this specific, highly kinetic scenario is exceptionally difficult to quantify. Human instinct dictates the fight-or-flight response, a massive involuntary dump of adrenaline and cortisol that urges the biological system to run. O'Grady overrode this hardwired biological imperative through rigorous psychological conditioning. He understood with absolute clarity that any movement would result in immediate execution or capture. He controlled his respiration, taking incredibly shallow, measured breaths, slowing his heart rate through sheer willpower, and lay perfectly still as the bullets tore through the vegetation inches from his head. If the technical reality of military evasion and physiological control fascinates you, make sure you are subscribed. The endurance phase requires your full, undivided attention. The technical doctrine of military evasion dictates that movement should only occur under the cover of absolute darkness, and even then, only when strategically necessary to improve communication capability or evade an advancing search line. O'Grady remained effectively immobilized during the daylight hours. The physiological and metabolic toll of this immobility, combined with the hostile environment, was severe. The human body, when subjected to high-stress environments without adequate hydration or caloric intake, begins to systematically shut down non-essential functions. His 29-pound survival bag contained very limited water, a supply that was exhausted rapidly. To supplement his hydration and stave off total renal failure, he relied on the microenvironment around him. The weather in the Bosnian mountains was unforgiving. When brief rain showers passed over the region, he utilized a specialized survival sponge from his kit, wiping the accumulated moisture off the broad leaves of the underbrush. He would then carefully wring the dirty, sediment-filled water into a small plastic bag, drinking the precious fluid to keep his core hydrated. The caloric deficit was equally pressing. To maintain the minimal energy required for cognitive function, spatial awareness, and thermal regulation, O'Grady consumed whatever the environment provided safely. He ate ants, beetles, leaves, and blades of grass. He was systematically starving, his body consuming its own fat and muscle reserves, but the consumption of insects provided the trace amounts of protein necessary to sustain his baseline neurological functions and prevent total physiological collapse. Every single physical action was meticulously calculated and executed with agonizing slowness. Before we analyze the complex radio protocols and the strict electromagnetic discipline that ultimately saved his life, drop a like to support these factual deep-dive documentaries. The technical reality of this survival requires full contextualization. The Serre doctrine emphasizes that even the smallest, most routine task can compromise an evader. If O'Grady needed to access his compass to verify a magnetic heading, the process of reaching into his pocket, extracting the device, reading the luminescent dial, and replacing it without making a sound could take upwards of 30 minutes. If he needed to transition from a prone position to a kneeling position to relieve muscle cramping, the biomechanical shift was executed over the course of 2 hours. This glacial pacing was specifically engineered to avoid creating auditory anomalies that would stand out against the natural, baseline acoustic signature of the forest. The Bosnian Serb patrols were relentless, utilizing both ground troops, tracking dogs, and aerial assets to scour the terrain. O'Grady navigated between only a few primary hiding spots over the course of 6 entire days, utilizing the deep shadows and the dense underbrush to hide his thermal signature from infrared scanners. The most critical, yet potentially lethal, asset in O'Grady's possession was the PRC-112 survival radio. This is a specialized line-of-sight communication device operating on standard military ultra-high and very high frequencies. However, possessing the radio was mathematically as dangerous as it was beneficial. The Bosnian Serb military possessed highly sophisticated direction-finding equipment. If O'Grady broadcasted his position indiscriminately, their electronic warfare units would intercept the transmission. They would triangulate his exact geographic coordinates based on signal strength and phase angle, and neutralize his position with concentrated artillery fire within minutes. Therefore, the protocol demanded absolute radio silence until he could guarantee that friendly, NATO-aligned aircraft were directly overhead. We analyze the cold, hard facts of military operations, free from exaggeration or dramatization. Subscribe now to keep these true stories alive and support the rigorous preservation of tactical history. Furthermore, the PRC-112 relied on a finite battery supply. If he depleted the power source listening to static, he would permanently sever his only link to the NATO command structure. O'Grady utilized the radio with extreme, disciplined operational security. He executed momentary, microburst transmissions only during specific, narrow time windows when he could visually confirm or audibly detect the high-altitude engine signatures of NATO aircraft. He moved incrementally, night by night, to higher elevations. In the physics of radio communication, elevation dictates line of sight. The higher the transmitting antenna, the broader the transmission cone, allowing the signal to punch through the terrain masking that was severely hindering his reach. Just after midnight, on the 8th of June, 1995, exactly 6 agonizing days after the SA-6 missile destroyed his aircraft, O'Grady initiated a precisely timed transmission. High above the overcast layer, an F-16 pilot from the 510th Fighter Squadron, flying under the operational callsign Basha 11, was conducting a routine combat air patrol. Captain Thomas Hanford was monitoring the standard emergency guard frequencies. A faint transmission broke through the static. It was brief, disciplined, and utilized the exact protocols required. O'Grady spoke his call sign. Hanford responded immediately. What followed was a rapid, mathematically precise exchange of standard authentication protocols to verify identity without compromising exact coordinates. Hanford asked for specific, pre-briefed operational details. The verification was confirmed. The mathematical probability of his survival was no longer a theoretical debate. It was an established, verified fact. The transmission was immediately relayed via secure data links to the NATO command structure. Hit the like button if you respect the absolute discipline and the aggressive doctrine required for the extraction phase. The TRAP mission protocol is a masterclass in calculated risk, and the launch sequence is about to be initiated. The military operation that was subsequently initiated is known within the United States military doctrine as a Tactical Recovery of Aircraft and Personnel, or TRAP mission. A TRAP mission is not a standard search and rescue operation. It is a highly aggressive, heavily armed combat insertion designed specifically to penetrate non-permissive hostile airspace, secure a downed asset, and extract them under the threat of direct, concentrated enemy engagement. The execution of this highly complex trap fell to the 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit, a forward-deployed, rapid-response amphibious force positioned in the Adriatic Sea aboard the Wasp-class amphibious assault ship USS Kearsarge. The composition of the trap STRA